The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your skin and makes you pull your jacket tighter around your shoulders. Harper stood at the edge of her backyard, her breath visible in the dim glow of the porch light. She had always loved the quiet of the countryside, the way the stars seemed to stretch endlessly above her. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the world was holding its breath. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It had started a few weeks ago, small things at first. Her neighbor, Mr. Grayson, had always been a little odd. He kept to himself, rarely seen outside his weathered, ivy-covered house. But lately, Harper had noticed strange things. Lights flickering in his windows late at night, the sound of digging coming from his backyard, and the way he would stare at her from his porch, his eyes dark and unreadable. She tried to brush it off, told herself she was being paranoid. But then she found the locket. It was a delicate thing, gold with a small emerald embedded in the center. She had stumbled upon it while taking a walk in the woods behind their houses. The chain was broken, as if it had been ripped off in a hurry. Harper had picked it up, turning it over in her hands, when she noticed the initials engraved on the back, E.M. She didn't know anyone with those initials, but something about the locket felt wrong. It felt out of place. That night, she had dreamt of a woman, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes wide with fear. She was running through the woods, branches clawing at her skin, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Harper woke up drenched in sweat. The image of the woman burned into her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that the dream meant something, that it was connected to the locket. The next morning, Harper decided to do some digging, figuratively at least. She started with the internet, searching for any news of missing women in the area. It didn't take long to find something. A woman named Emily Matthews had disappeared 6 months ago. She had last been seen hiking in the woods near Harper's town. The description matched the woman in her dream: long brown hair, green eyes, and a gold locket with the initials E.M. Harper's stomach churned. It couldn't be a coincidence. She tried to convince herself that she was overreacting, that there was no way Mr. Grayson could be involved. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. The late-night digging, the way he watched her, the locket. Harper knew she had to find out the truth. That night, she waited until the house was dark before slipping out the back door. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the yard. She moved quietly, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached the fence that separated her property from Mr. Grayson's. She could see his backyard from here, the overgrown grass and the old shed that leaned precariously to one side. And then she saw it, a patch of freshly turned earth near the shed. Harper's breath caught in her throat. She had to get closer. She climbed over the fence, her hands trembling as she landed softly on the other side. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic. She crept toward the shed, her eyes fixed on the patch of dirt. As she got closer, she noticed something sticking out of the ground. A pale hand, fingers curled as if reaching for something. She stifled a scream, clapping a hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. She had to get out of there, had to call the police. But as she turned to leave, she heard the creak of a door opening behind her. Harper froze, her blood turning to ice. She slowly turned her head, her eyes widening in horror as she saw Mr. Grayson standing in the doorway of the shed. He was holding a shovel, his face shadowed but his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that made her stomach drop. "Harper," he said, his voice low and smooth. "What are you doing out here so late?" She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. Mr. Grayson took a step toward her, the shovel dragging behind him. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice almost regretful. "But now that you have, I can't let you leave." Harper's survival instincts kicked in, and she turned and ran, her heart pounding in her ears. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. She didn't look back, didn't dare. She just ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she stumbled through the dark. She reached the fence and scrambled over it, her hands slipping on the wet wood. She landed hard on the other side, pain shooting through her ankle, but she didn't stop. She ran toward her house, her mind racing. She had to get inside, had to lock the doors, had to call for help. But as she reached her back door, she realized with a sinking feeling that it was already open. She hesitated, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She pushed the door open slowly, her eyes scanning the dark kitchen. Everything seemed normal, but the air felt wrong. She stepped inside, her heart pounding as she reached for the light switch. The moment the light flicked on, she saw him, Mr. Grayson, standing in the corner of the room, his eyes fixed on her. He was holding a knife, the blade glinting in the light. Harper screamed, the sound tearing from her throat as she turned and ran back out the door. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps pounding against the ground. She didn't know where she was going, just knew she had to get away. She ran into the woods, the trees closing in around her. Branches clawed at her skin, but she didn't stop. She could hear him getting closer, his breathing heavy and labored. She stumbled over a root, falling hard to the ground. She scrambled to her feet, but he was already there, his hand closing around her arm. Harper fought, kicking and screaming as he dragged her back toward the house. She could feel the cold metal of the knife against her skin, and she knew she was running out of time. She had to do something, had to think of a way out. And then she remembered the locket. She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the cold metal. She swung it at him, the chain wrapping around his wrist. He hissed in pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to pull away. She ran, her legs burning as she pushed herself to go faster. She didn't look back, didn't dare. She just ran, her mind focused on one thing: survival. She didn't stop until she reached the road, her chest heaving as she collapsed onto the asphalt. She could see headlights in the distance, and she waved her arms frantically, screaming for help. The car slowed, and a man stepped out, his face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Harper sobbed, relief flooding through her as she realized she was safe. But as she looked back toward the woods, she knew it wasn't over. Mr. Grayson was still out there, and he wasn't going to stop until he found her. The police arrived quickly, their lights flashing in the dark. Harper told them everything, her voice shaking as she described what had happened. They searched the woods, but Mr. Grayson was gone. All they found was the locket, lying in the dirt where she had dropped it. Harper knew she would never forget that night, the terror that had gripped her as she ran for her life. She moved away soon after, unable to shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, she would dream of the woman in the woods, her eyes wide with fear, her hand reaching out as if to warn her. Harper would wake up drenched in sweat, the image burned into her mind. She knew she would never be truly safe, not as long as Mr. Grayson was out there. But for now, she was alive, and that was enough. If you enjoyed this creepy tale of terror and suspense, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Remember, the shadows are always watching, and danger can be closer than you think. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and keep the lights on.